reading into stuff like I do and having only half a neuron causes me to ask some pretty stupid questions sometimes. Or at least questions that sound stupid. If you look at the title of the video, you'll probably recognize it as one of those stupid questions. On the other hand, if you looked at the title of the video and still clicked it, you're probably curious enough to hear me out. See, the Gerudo have a pretty curious history in Zelda. They don't appear in many games. In their debut title, they bring up an interesting piece of information. Only one male is born among them every 100 years. That male is crowned their king. And to my knowledge, there are only 2 games where the Gerudo appear, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Majora's Mask and Breath of the Wild. And for clarity, I'm not going to talk about Wind Waker in this because it seems like the Gerudos themselves have either been melded into the Hylians or they just kind of died off. And in Majora's Mask, this doesn't bother me. The Gerudo there are pirates, and Termina's a bit weird anyways. So I'm sure either they have multiple ships with one male acting as the Pirate King or something, or at least he's fucked off somewhere else. Assuming Termina's equivalent of Ganondorf isn't dead anyways, which, who knows, it's Termina. Nobody really knows what's going on there. But then there's Breath of the Wild. Now, having no male in this game bugs the shit out of me for a few reasons. For one, it's not like their leadership structure has changed too much since Ocarina anyways. They're still centered in a single fortress with a single ruler and a prominent warrior culture. The only big difference is that they've gone from thieves to merchants. Even then, I do wonder if the Gerudo were originally warrior merchants akin to desert Vikings somehow. Secondly, Gerudo have lifespans approximately as long as Hylians. Urbosa was in, if not nearing the end of, her prime during the Calamity in Hyrule Warriors. But when Link wakes up, her successor is a young girl who isn't even big enough to wear the Thunder Helm without it slipping off to the side. So surely there was someone in between them. And while we don't know much about Riju's mother, it definitely wasn't Urbosa, since Riju directly refers to the former champion as one of her ancestors. Also, keep in mind how long the timeline for Breath of the Wild actually is. Even if we exclude the first fight against Calamity Ganon, there's a 100-year difference between when Link goes to sleep and when he wakes up. And a Gerudo King is born once every 100 years. So let me ask again. Where's the Gerudo King? The way I see it, there's 2 different answers. The more likely answer and the more entertaining one. The likely answer is that the Gerudo King, during the Age of Breath of the Wild, simply lived out his entire life while Link was asleep, and thus might have been Riju's father. And since the Gerudo are a matriarchal society, they felt no need to mention or revere him as much as Riju's mother. Like I said, they have lifespans comparable to Hylians, so it's entirely possible he was born shortly after the Calamity and died some time before Riju became the Gerudo chief. But there's another way to think about it. One that ties a little more closely to established Zelda lore and gives what I feel is a more satisfying answer, albeit one that requires a bit of mental gymnastics. Thus, let's establish 2 facts that will help bring this together. First off, the once every 100 years number is an approximation based on Gerudo lifetimes, and the Gerudo are biologically incapable of giving birth to men. Thus, both instances of Ganondorf in the series are a bit unnatural. Oh, side note, I say both and not all because Four Swords Adventure is a game that exists in every other instance of Ganondorf as the exact same person biologically, at least as far as I'm aware. Secondly, I want to argue that a new Gerudo King isn't in Breath of the Wild because the old one is still alive. It's not exactly new information that Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf are all on separate but intrinsically linked resurrection cycles. You know, because all the stuff that happened during Skyward Sword with Demise, that's a video for some other YouTuber, though. So here's my theory. A new Gerudo male can only be born when the old one dies. Similarly to how there could only be one person worthy to grab the Master Sword at a time. Some weird side effect of Demise's curse makes it so the Gerudo will, on occasion, give birth to a male. Thus leads to my own personal headcanon that Ganondorf is probably either a title or a tradition rather than an actual name, given that the one Gerudo male, who isn't the guy that almost plunged Hyrule into a goddamn ocean, or in one timeline anyways, is also given that name despite that there'd probably be some understandable controversy around it. I mean, within the timeline that Four Swords Adventure takes place in, the Ganondorf of Ocarina of Time, and thus Twilight Princess, has been dead for a while now, but people probably still talk about him. Like, oh yeah, that one guy almost took over Hyrule by busting into the Sacred Realm and may or may not have led an army of literal interdimensional alien shadow people. Yeah, that's a thing for the history books. Now, if this was written and recorded before that initial Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, the logical response would be, okay, but we're back to Where's the Gerudo King, right? That was E3 2019, and oh yeah, it's been over a year. We're probably gonna get some new Breath of the Wild information like this week. I should probably just wait to release this, but who cares? I'm crazy. And we're dealing with COVID years here, so it probably feels even longer than that. Huh. But anyways, since it's been that long, I can firmly say that regardless of whether or not that corpse is Ganondorf specifically, which some people do argue about, not gonna get into that, the Gerudo King is probably the mummy we saw in the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. And I think we can say that it being there is preventing a new Gerudo male from being born. After all, it is alive enough to respond to external stimuli, right? We clearly see it being very not happy that Zelda and Link showed up. Of course, that does leave some lingering questions I don't really have answers to, and we might find out at E3. How long has he been down there? Why would the Gerudo specifically be targeted by Demise's curse when they're not present in Skyward Sword? Or is this done by the goddess worshipped in the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time? Because for all we know, the goddess of the sand has absolutely nothing to do with Hylia or the Golden Goddesses. And though there's no evidence one way or another, I have my doubts that she's directly related to Demise. But, Occam's Razor says it's probably just Riju's dad. I hope he's proud of his little girl. If it is, though, maybe we'll get a side quest in Breath of the Wild 2 where we actually meet a little Gerudo child and help take care of him. Plus, that would be a good explanation for why the Desert Vo armor exists when there's no Gerudo Vo. Food for thought.